Hello students, welcome to the Analyst dated 25th of August 2023. Today we look at 5 important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. The first article will be regarding right to information. Then we'll look at BRICS Expansion. Then we'll look at organized crime. Finally, we'll look at Defense Acquisition Council and we'll take up a case study of CME Pune. Now the first article relates to your GS2 and here we'll look at right to information. Now, what do we mean by right to information? A, it is a right. Second, it is a right about information. Now, when I am talking about information, I am essentially talking about public information. Then, whenever I am talking about right, I am essentially talking about the role of state to furnish me with information. Now let's understand why do we need right to information. So information is the currency of democracy. This was said by Thomas Jefferson. That means somewhere down the line, democratic governance requires free flow of information and more particularly the information which are coming from public sources. Then we need to achieve our full potential. Your life and liberty is not about mere animal existence, which was held in Menaka Gandhi versus Union of India. And it is to achieve your full potential in terms of social, political and economic potential. Then transparency is also a fundamental of good governance. So whenever we are talking about transparency, what do we mean? We mean openness. And openness is antithetical to opaqueness or to secrecy. Furthermore, it is an antidote to bribery as well as corruption. So fundamentally speaking, if we are talking about good governance, then we require transparency. Then what do we mean by accountability? So we want our public offices and public servants to be accountable. And how can they be held accountable unless we have the public information? So the information and how do we decimate that information? How do we process that information? How do we understand patterns from the same information will tell us how accountable our public offices and public servants will be. Because we are progressing and we want a participative democracy. We want a proactive citizenry. We do not want a reactive or passive citizenry. We want more and more participation right to the grassroots level. That is why we have Panchayati Raj institutions. So if we are more proactive, if we are more participative, then we will ask more accountability. Then our democracy will also mature. And if we ask for more accountability, then corruption, bribery, etc., all the evils of governance, that will naturally subside. Then right to information is essential for rule of law. Why? Because the idea of rule of law is antithetical to arbitrariness. So let's take an example. Let's say there are two people, right? One of them has full information and the other person has partial information. So what do we call this? This is information asymmetry. And if there is information asymmetry, then what happens? The person will, with full information, that person will be able to take better decisions. So do we want our public authorities to have all information, but as citizens, for us to have only partial information? So it is logical to say it is logical to say that is why your right to information is also part of the human rights. It is inalienable to your human rights. And generally, we see whatever is there in human rights is usually also found in our fundamental rights. And that is why we need to understand how the courts have read this right. So, whenever we talk about our fundamental rights under Part 3, so the foremost is 19(1)(a), where we talk about freedom of speech and expression. Now, how can I speak without the information? If I do not have any data, if I cannot get access to information, what will I speak? What will I express? That means if I have or if I am in information asymmetry, then what will happen? I may speak wrong, or I may not be able to express myself because I am under darkness. I do not know all the facts, and that is why you definitely need information. And this information should be A, it should be truthful information, and B, this information must be given to me in a timely manner. Let's say I give you this analysis 50 days late. So, time is of essence for all of us. And truthful nature. Let's say I do not remember some facts, right? So, I am presenting wrongful facts. Then what will happen? There will be again information asymmetry. That should not happen. Now, we must look at 3 case laws here, which we can reproduce in any arguments, even in your essays, your GS2 papers or ethics papers. So, in Bennett Coleman versus Union of India, this is a case law of 1973. So, here the court said that the freedom, the right to information is implied. It is implied under your freedom of speech and expression under 19(1)(a). Then, in state of UP versus Raj Narayan, it held that the people of the country have a right to know every public act. Why? Because public acts, public activities, they are for the benefit of people. And let the people adjudicate, let the people appreciate what public acts are being done. Then, everything that is done in a public way by either public or functionaries. Finally, in PUCL versus Union of India, it was categorically held that right to information is a facet of freedom under Article 19(1)(a). Therefore, right to information is indisputably a fundamental right. That simply means that right to information is also part of Article 19(1)(a). Now, given that it is a fundamental right at this point, what have we done about it? So, we came with an act, a statute, the RTI Act. Now, we look at some of the sections of RTI Act which can be used in your answers on, let's say, RTI Act, its challenges, etc. So, let's understand what the Act says. So, Section 2F defines information. Now, what do I mean by information? So, it can be written, it can be in electronic format, it can be any fax, it can be any government document. So, it says any material in any form, including records, documents, memos, emails, opinions, and which can be assessed by public authorities under any other law for the time being in force. So, it simply tries to say that we are referring to all public records, all type of public records, all type of communications. Then 2J talks about the right to information. Here, right to information means the right to information accessible under this act, which is held by or under the control of any public authority. That means we are not talking about, let's say, me as an individual, me, let's say, as a company. So, Individuals, companies, they do not come under the ambit of RTI to say so, prima facie. But if any private party is performing the function of state, naturally that part will be coming as public authority. Now, what kind of rights am I getting? So, rights to inspect. Inspect what? The public records. The right to take notes, to understand it, to disseminate it, to break it down, and to also take copies. Now, does it mean that I get information and that information becomes my personal information, or I have to keep it a secret? So, right to information also includes your right to decimate, to publish it, to talk about it. Let's say you go for an RTI application and you find some discrepancies in a government policy, government scheme. Then can you write an article about it? Naturally. And we, on a daily basis, we see that there are articles written on discrepancies which were found due to RTI applications. Now, Section 4, it reposes faith on the public authorities. What kind of faith? So it talks about suo motu disclosure. What do we mean by suo motu? That means on its own undertaking, without request from anyone. If I have processed my information, if I have collated my information, and there are no issues in publishing that information that is of public nature, then as public authority, I should go for suo motu publication. However, this suo motu disclosure is very slow and it is rarely used by public authorities. Now, apart from that, the public authority will also have to, let's say, translate it into local languages and to make it accessible. Let's say I ask an information on a scheme and in reply I get 2000 pages of record. Then is it beneficial to me? Because I am asking a simple question. So the public authority also has this duty to transmit or to give me that information which I am seeking, which I am asking for, right? Now, Section 5 says that there will be public information officers or PIO. Now, that simply means that whatever administration we already have, whatever bureaucracy we already have, we are making PIOs from them only. These are not new officers. They will just have this position, right? That simply means that now in every office, there will be an officer who will be looking at the RTI Act and its execution. Then Section 7 talks about the timeline of information dissemination. So it has to be given in 30 days, but when it relates to life or liberty, it has to be given in 48 hours. Let's say there is a habeas corpus petition. Habeas corpus, let's say, produce the body. Where is this person? So in such cases where life and liberty is at stake, so 48 hours. Now, Section 8 is about, again, Section 8 is a type of reasonable restriction. Why? Because we have discussed that our constitution, our legal system does not believe in absolutism. That means we cannot get all the information from public authorities. There are some riders. Let's say when it relates to sovereignty and integrity of India, when it relates to some foreign relations, when it relates to Official Secrets Act, when it relates to something which is of secretive nature, let's say defense deals, etc. And many organizations, many institutions of the state are also beyond the purview of RTI Act. Let's say agencies like Intelligence Bureau, let's say security agencies. They are beyond the purview of RTI. Now, some other day, we look at two aspects of RTI, how it has been implemented and what are the remaining challenges. That calls for a separate discussion. Today we have understand that right to information A is a fundamental right. B, it is must for a democracy. C, it has taken shape in form of the RTI Act, and we have looked at the sections. Now we look at the BRICS expansion. This pertains to GS2 international relations. Now here BRICS gets 6 new members. And what do we mean by BRICS? So it is a grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, which has taken shape in and around 2009 and 2010. Now, we have got 6 new members. So let's look at the members. First is Argentina from South America. Then we are looking at 2 states from African continent. One is Ethiopia. Second is Egypt. Then we have got UAE and Saudi Arabia from Middle East as well as Iran. So these are the new members along with the 5 old members. Now let's try to look at the timeline. So the proposal came from Jim O'Neill from Goldman Sachs about emerging economies. So this was also the time when along with BRICS, India was also seen as part of Fragile Five, right? A lot has changed given that India has now become the 5th largest economy of the world. Then the world saw 2008 global financial crisis. And what happened? So the stock markets tanked all across the world. Then it led to a lot of slowdown. Then recession. What else? People lost faith on dollar and West dominated institutions. So this was happening as the global financial crisis was emerging towards the world, which started from the US with the meltdown of Lehman Brothers. Now, 2009 we have BRIC taking shape in Russia. Then in 2010, South Africa was also added. So it finally took the name BRICS. So it is like an alternative to the West dominated institutions, and it is also a representative of emerging markets as well as of global South. Then in 2014 in Fort Laza, we got 2 important additions: contingency reserve arrangement as well as we got the NDB, the New Development Bank, with $100 billion of funds from its own members. And finally, in 2023, Johannesburg, and this is your 15th summit, we got 6 new members, making it a 11-member grouping. Now, let's look at each of these countries and try to understand their respective conditions. So, Iran is hit by sanctions from West and US regarding the nuclear ambitions. Then, Iran is also going closer to China, being part of One Belt, One Road, and a promise of $400 billion of investments. The way China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is a $60 billion project. Similarly, China has promised a $400 billion project worth of projects in Iran. Then Saudi Arabia. So the West is looking at some issues. issues of oil prices, energy war, then it is going against the cartelization in terms of oil. Then it is also under pressure because of Russia-Ukraine war. So when you pressure the cartel of OPEC and OPEC Plus to not cartelize the oil, naturally they will look out to balance the West. Even though Saudi Arabia, UAE, they are traditional allies. But what China has done, it has brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which are arch enemies, arch rivals. So backed by China as well as Russia. So over the period of time, what have we seen? That during the Russia-Ukraine crisis, Russia and China grew closer versus the West. And West using NATO and the Anglo-Saxon alliance, it again reinvigorated the ideas of a combined West. While they do not like such ideas, they want the West to be weakened. So an alternate, a non-West alliance, an anti-West alliance is on the papers. Now, UAE and Saudi Arabia, they are also hub of oil, gas, trade, as well as investments. Given that UAE is also a global financial capital, and these countries also have very big sovereign wealth funds which invest in multiple economies, including the Indian economy. Then when we look at Africa, the two nations, again they are resource rich, whether it is oil, gas, gold, critical minerals, rare earth minerals. And when you look at Argentina, it is under economic crisis, but it is also having lots of lithium and rare earth. So what do we see here? We see that a lot of non-West countries, like-minded countries who wish to grow and who wish to get out of the Western embrace or want to hedge against the Western embrace of dollar and the dollar-dominated world economy. So it is anti-West for Russia, for China, for Iran. And it is non-West for, let's say, UAE, Saudi Arabia, as well as for India. While it is also a hedge to create a multipolar world. And it is in India's interest that the world is multipolar. When India participated in G7 Hiroshima, then the world said that India is growing closer towards the West. When we are taking Quad meetings here, then the world was telling that India is creating an alliance against China. Now, when we are expanding BRICS, we can say that we are also hedging our bets against the West-dominated world. And that is why we are vying for multipolarity as we find our true space in the new world order. However, critics have pointed out that the expansion is pro-China, and majority of these countries, they are aligned towards China. However, not to deprecate such expansion, but in all, it is a win-win situation for the global South, and it is a win-win situation for the non-West countries. Now, let's look at some impacts. So, with this increase, the GDP, which is right now 29% of the world, it will increase because there is $1 trillion of Saudi Arabia also coming in. Then population wise, it will be more than 50% of the world. And oil production wise, it can go even to 70% of global oil production. That simply tells us that whenever we are looking at BRICS expansion, it is also about resource. Why? Because emerging markets like India and China, they're resource hungry. Whether we are talking about EVs, whether we are talking about power, whether we are talking about oil and gas, we want more and more resources. And if we can create a grouping where such trade is without the US dollar and at favorable terms to all the member countries, then what will happen? So it will be a win-win both for these nations as well as for India. Given that these nations are also facing a lot of sanctions, and that is why they are not able to sell their resources at market prices. While India wants to buy these resources at subpar market prices. So when we go for bulk deal, when we go for long-term arrangements of resource supply, what happens? It is a win-win for both these countries, the supplier as well as the buyer. Right? Now, we look at organized crime, and this pertains to your GS3. Now, what do we understand by organized crime? So, A, it is a crime. And whenever there is a crime, the crime is against society. So, the state, that means the government, will prosecute the criminals. But when some group of people who are, let's say, criminals, they involve themselves in an organization or they are more structured to commit a crime, then it will be called as organized crime. Now, so what is the modus operandi? A, it is a well-oiled machinery. That means, like we operate corporations. So, there'll be structure. That means, who is the kingpin, then who are the three biggest handlers who have their individual departments. So, it is just like a well-oiled, structured, with hierarchy and organization like operation. But what are they doing? What is the idea? The idea is to A, organize yourself. So organize yourself, then commit a crime. Together, take up bulk orders, let's say to assassinate, let's say to go for robberies. So take such orders. Then to earn. But once you earn, what do? So you need to go for some form of money laundering. Why? Because the proceeds, the money that I am earning is illegal, it is ill-gotten. So now I have to go for some layering, some hawala operations. And again, I will reintroduce this into, let's say, real estate, or let's say gold, or let's say I will siphon off my money abroad. Or I can even pump my same organization to make it bigger. So it is a self-feeding vicious cycle. Now, we must look at what are its links. So A, it is linked with criminals. So whether we are talking about criminals in jail, whether we are talking about criminals abroad, so they operate with convergence. They collaborate with each other. They help each other in terms of, let's say, logistics. And that is why we see a lot of news like gang wars, let's say in jails, or gang going for violence on streets. So they are linked, and multiple organized crime groups, they will talk to each other, they will collaborate with each other in logistics. Then it is also linked with corruption. Why? Because if ill-gotten wealth. So I have gotten illegal wealth. So I'll do everything to protect it. So I need some shelter. Shelter from, let's say, police, let's say, politicians, or even businesses. And so I will in return give them bribes. I will bribe them so that there is no action on my gang, right? So these things are also linked directly to corruption in public life. Now, let's talk about linkages with terrorism. So, when we look at organized crime, what are these? It's a bunch of criminals. So, these criminals are there for hire. Now, let's say the police is acting on these organized crimes. So, what happens? The funds dry up. Or, let's say, there is lack of demand, so funds are drying up. But there are too many criminals. So what happens? They will take up any project. And if, let's say, it is a terrorism related plot, so they can help with their organized crime of criminals organization. So their whole organization can aid and abet, let's say, transportation of criminals, transportation of terrorists, let's say, getting them some arms. So, if some terrorists are entering India through the coastal route and they are without any weapons, but they are able to procure these weapons once they come to India. How that happens? That happens because the organized crime gangs who are doing gun running, they are able to provide these logistics. Let's say someone crosses the border along LOC. So, from Mirpur, someone comes to Pune illegally, without any weapon, without any drugs. Okay, just the person is coming, and that person is a trained terrorist. Now, how will that person procure, let's say, a phone, let's say some money, gun? So, direct linkage with organized crime. But there is a difference between terrorism and organized crime. So usually terrorism is against the state. It is to topple the state. It is to destroy anything that relates to the state. But when we look at organized crime, it is trying to work along the state. So along the state, and the motive is very clear: to use fear to get more money. So the idea is resource centric. On the other hand, terrorism is about challenging the state. Now, what can be the types of organized crime that we see on a day-to-day basis? And one good example that we must remember when we are talking about organized crime and its linkages with terrorism is the 1993 blasts, where the Dawood Ibrahim gang, it facilitated the terrorist blasts. It became a courier, or it helped in all types of logistics. So that is a good example. Now, when we are talking about white collar crime, can we talk about the Harshad Mehta scam? Can we talk about Abdul Karim Telgi forging stamp papers, multiple counts of insider trading, right? Pump and dump schemes on multiple companies. What else? arms sales. Now, whenever we see any kind of crime, whether it is thuggery, lootery, anything, so you will see that arms have come from somewhere. So whether it is local katta or it is sophisticated weapons like 47, AK-47. So how are they entering the markets? How are people making videos and pictures about these weapons? Right? Then drug trafficking, given that we are near the golden triangle as well as golden crescent. So golden crescent towards west and golden triangle towards east. So if this is India and you have two hotspots of drug trafficking, then what happens? You become a courier. So a lot of drugs can pass through India. And while passing, it can also create its own economy, like what is happening in Kashmir, like what has happened in Punjab also, right? So the issue of drug trafficking, then the issue of prostitution rings, the issue of bribery, money laundering, hawala operations. How money laundering, hawala operations are also linked to white collar crimes, and they are also linked to terrorism, organized crime groups. So multiple uses of the same crime. So what do we mean by money laundering? So I have got ill-gotten wealth. Now I want to show this ill-gotten wealth as legitimate. So what I'll do, I will ship it somewhere, then layer it through multiple transactions and finally reintroduce it into the financial systems through multiple layers of transactions. Then we have hawala routes to send money abroad and to receive money abroad. Then recently cryptocurrency was also being used. Then you have drug syndicates, we have extortion, we have land mafias, and we will see that a lot of organized crime gangs and individuals, they are also part of the political process. And that is why the issue of criminalization of politics. That is why the use of muscle and money power in politics. Then smuggling, kidnapping, political violence, ransomware. So new forms of organized crimes are also coming, and these are more sophisticated. Very recently, we can see that betting. So whenever India has banned something, whether it is liquor in a state, so what happens? So bootlegging starts. Let's say betting is banned. So what happens? These bettings are completely underground. So what will happen to the proceeds of the betting? Let's say someone made 10 crores, someone lost 10 crores. So where the money is going, right? And are these transactions happening through UPI or are they happening in cash, right? So all types of such crime are involved. Now, what is the way forward? How different states have fought the issue of organized crimes. So, usually our method. Now, how these states have fought organized crime. So, it is through use of A, public information, B, use of state police, as well as help of central agencies, using intelligence networks, and the attack is on the ringleaders and the finance. The ringleaders and the finance. And you will see a lot of strong laws like Makoka. So to tackle, so very stringent laws to tackle organized crime across states. And usually the police will create STFs, Special Task Force, or some commando battalion, and anti-terrorist squads, let's say in Mumbai, ATS. So all these specialized organizations better skilled to root out such menace. More importantly, the biggest issue of organized crime is finance. So, whenever the attack finally permeates to the finance or the well-oiled machinery of how finance is accounted for, and then finally it is layered how it is money laundered. Once finance is sorted, so its back is broken. So that is how we go about the way forward. Now let's look at Defense Acquisition Council, and this pertains to your GS3 security. Now, what is the objective of DSC and why it is in news? It is in news because it gave almost 8,000 crores of orders. Now, the objective is expedited acquisition of defense equipments. For whom? For the Navy, the Air Force and the Army. Now, who are party? What is the composition of DSE? So, it is headed by the Defense Minister. Then you have the CDS and the chiefs of all the three forces. Now, what are its functions? So, it will give its accord of necessity. Let's say there is a proposal to buy some weapons. So, it will accept or reject the necessity based upon the necessity. Then, it will categorize into buy and make and make. Now, what do we mean by this? Buy and make. So, buy is off the shelf buying. That means something is already manufactured. I go out there, let's say in a mall, and I buy 3 items. So that is buy, simply buying from shelf. Let's say some weapons manufactured in Israel, I am buying it ready made. So it is a buy. Then buy and make. So what are we doing here? So we are buying some part, let's say some tech, but we are making it in India. So buy plus make, and then make. So here whole and soul, we are going for domestic R&D to final production. So made in India, right? Then it looks into issues of single vendor clearances. Then it also looks at offset provisions. Let's say there is a 1,000 crore order. So the offsets clause says that 40% of this will have to be spent, or 40% of the total order will have to be made in India, or it will go to domestic manufacturers. So that is a offset clause. And most importantly, it also looks into technology transfer, whether it is coming into India or we are sharing the technology with someone else, as well as the field trials. And this comes under our Ministry of Defense, right? Now we'll take up a case study of CME Pune, which has gone carbon negative. Now, what do we mean by carbon negativity? So let's say I am adding some carbon to the atmosphere and I am subtracting some carbon. Let's say I am subtracting more from the atmosphere and I'm adding very less. So what do I become? I become carbon negative, because I am not at all adding carbon to the atmosphere. In fact, I am decreasing it. So carbon negative. And we must appreciate that at this point, we are looking at carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality, that too by 2070. And CME Pune has gone for carbon negativity. So it's a brilliant effort, and that is why we can use it as a case study. Now, this is essentially College of Military Engineering. It is India's first carbon negative garrison, established in 1948. And basically, it is a 7 megawatt solar project which has saved 6.5 crores fiscally speaking, and it is supporting the NDA Pune and Command Hospital Pune. So the entire ecosystem around it. Then it also aids clean air program and it reduces the reliance on thermal power. Now achievements. So the 7 megawatt project is 5 and 2. So this is phase 1 project and this is phase 2 project. So 5 megawatt has already been commissioned, 2 is yet to come, and CME Pune has become India's first carbon negative garrison. I hope it helped. Thank you so much.